You may not have heard about this incident, but it seems pretty notable to me, or at least it should be notable. Newsweek has the report. It says a Delta Airlines pilot asked strong males to help subdue a problem passenger who turned out to be an off-duty flight attendant during a chaotic flight from Los Angeles to Atlanta on Friday. A Delta spokesperson reportedly said the unnamed off-duty flight attendant hijacked the plane's public address system to speak to passengers about their oxygen masks during Flight 1730, which prompted a dramatic tussle with passengers. The pilot told passengers, according to NBC, "This is the captain speaking. We'd like all strong males to come to the front of the aircraft to handle a problem passenger." Now, what does that tell you, by the way? All strong males. You notice he called for strong males. He didn't call for any women, because in that moment, when you're up 30,000 feet in the air and there's something happening and needs to be contained, there's no time to worry about political correctness. We need the strong guys here. That's kind of interesting. That's not really the point, though. Video of the chaos was posted to Twitter by a passenger who witnessed it, and she posted the clip explaining, quote, that someone tried to hijack our plane from LAX to Atlanta. So that's what she said, hijack the plane. Here's what that video looks like. Let's watch a little bit of it. All three of them. Okay, so you see a whole bunch of guys tussle. Can't really see much. This is certainly the kind of thing you don't want to see when you're on an airplane. All right, and eventually they contained the guy, and then they made an emergency landing. And there you go. Now, you look at that video and you hear the story. If you feel like you already heard this same story a few weeks ago and saw a video kind of like that, that's because you did, or something very similar to it. In that case, it was a flight also from LA. This was 2 weeks ago or so. You may be noticing a pattern. Both of these are from LA. This time it was heading to Nashville, and a, quote, unruly passenger tried to break into the cockpit and was tackled and restrained by a group of flight attendants. Now, these alleged attempted hijackings, or whatever they were, may not have been very sophisticated, and they may not have had any real chance of success. It's not like the plane was ever in any danger of being taken down. But still, 2 in less than a month seems like a lot. And in fact, a lot doesn't begin to cover it. There's been a huge rise in violent and dangerous behavior on flights. They mostly aren't attempted hijackings, but even so, the figures cited by Newsweek in the same article are just outrageous and almost impossible to believe. Listen to this. Quoting now, it says, in early May, the Federal Aviation Administration warned air travelers about a significant rise in dangerous behavior aboard flights in 2021. There are usually 100 to 150 official instances of unruly passenger behavior in a typical year. But listen to this. That figure leaped to more than 1,300 in the first 4 months of this year, according to the agency. 1,300 in 4 months, as opposed to 100 or so in a whole year. In fact, a BBC article says that U.S. airlines have reported 3,000 unruly passengers this year. Now, there might be a distinction being drawn here between dangerous and unruly, which may explain the disparity. But whether we're looking at 1,300 or 3,000, there's obviously something going on here. A part of the problem is certainly the masking policies, I would guess. A certain number of those unruly passengers may have simply been not wearing a mask or not wearing it correctly and were categorized as unruly and kicked off the plane. I don't know if all these toddlers we see getting kicked off planes because they're not wearing masks, or do they go down in the books officially as unruly? I don't know. And certain other instances, certain other passengers in these videos have become unruly because of disputes over masks. And in general, flying is a high-stress situation in a claustrophobic environment already. Any additional annoyances or discomforts added, like having to wear a muzzle on your face the whole time, will only increase the likelihood of confrontations. So that must account for some of the rise in dangerous behavior on flights, but it probably doesn't account for all of it. Especially when you consider that this problem extends far beyond the airline industry. Every other day, there's another video circulating online of massive brawls breaking out, sometimes in airports and on planes, but also in restaurants, malls, anywhere else. Add to that the much publicized videos of people being randomly assaulted in the street. We hear about the Asian victims of these kinds of crimes, but the problem is not limited to Asian victims. And then, of course, there's the surge in violent crime across the country generally, as many of our biggest cities see record numbers of murders, assaults, robberies, etc. It's not just violent crime either. San Francisco has seen a rise in shoplifting that's so dramatic that it's putting many stores out of business. The Independent reports that Walgreens has had to close down 17 locations just due to so-called petty theft. Speaking of which, video posted yesterday shows a shoplifter literally loading a garbage bag with stolen goods and then casually riding his bike. Yeah, he rode his bike into the store, riding it out of the store while security guards look on helplessly, not doing anything about it. Let's watch some of that footage here.
Wow.
Now, the security guards are filming it. Or it looks like it's an employee and a security guard. He makes a kind of lackadaisical attempt. He makes a lackadaisical attempt to grab the bag, but then gives up. And says, never mind. You can take it. And you can hear, I think it was the employee saying, should we call 911? And I don't know whether they called 911 or not, but they probably didn't, because it's been made clear that the cops are not going to pursue criminals like this because they're not going to be prosecuted. Now, you think about San Francisco, between the homeless people defecating in the street, the heroin addicts throwing their needles all over the sidewalk, shoplifters strolling out of drugstores with garbage bags full of merchandise, San Francisco is just a lovely place to live. And by lovely, I mean it's a godforsaken hellscape, not unlike many other cities in this country. And so far, listing all of these things, we haven't said anything about the rioting which plagued our cities last summer and has now coincidentally tapered off now that there's a Democrat in office. But even so, the precedent has been set that mobs of opportunistic scumbags can pour into the street and set fire to random buildings whenever they're upset about something. And they'll face almost no consequence. Unless they're right-wing, in which case, even if they're trespassing, they're going to be hunted down by the federal government and thrown in jail for 20 years. And all of this is to say nothing of the suicide epidemic among kids, which we discussed at some length yesterday. Now, add all of this together, and what do you get? Not much, I suppose, except maybe the breakdown of human society. That's all. I mean, any one of these factors, rioting, homicide epidemic, people beating the hell out of each other on airplanes, may not signify a societal breakdown on its own, but put them all together at the same time, and I'm not sure what else to call it. The interesting question is why this is happening. I think there's really no question that we're looking at the breakdown of society. The question really is why? And why right now? As for that, I think 3 contributing factors should be mentioned, though this is far from an exhaustive list. One, it's not a coincidence that many of us predicted this sort of thing well over a year ago when the government locked us all in our homes. We were exactly right, but we didn't need to be prophets or fortune tellers to see it coming. You cannot shut down a society of 330 million people for any length of time and expect it to start back up again like nothing happened. In sci-fi movies, you can cryogenically freeze an individual person for a year or 100 years or whatever, and then thaw them out and they'll be good as new, right? In the movies. But even in the movies, you can't do that to an entire society. That doesn't work in fiction, let alone reality. There are consequences to such a drastic and unnecessary measure. Even when you open things back up and you hope that everything's going to go back to normal, it doesn't work that way. There are going to be serious consequences, catastrophic consequences, in fact, and we're seeing them right now, I would argue. 2, another factor is that trust in and respect for authority is probably at an all-time low. And some of that is deserved. Nobody trusts or respects our politicians, nor should they. But then police also have been demonized as departments are defunded, and even the departments that aren't defunded have trouble recruiting new talent. Why would anyone want to be a cop with the knowledge that they'll be branded a racist murderer at the outset? And if they ever have to use deadly force, God forbid, they may well go to prison for it, whether it was justified or not. And even if they don't go to prison for it, their life's going to be ruined. And 3, I think the final factor we should note, this is nothing new, but we should mention, combined with these other ingredients, there is the general lack of meaning and purpose among so many in our civilization, as the flight from God and religion, theistic religion anyway, continues. So, we have a society of people already in despair, many of them, from their sense of meaninglessness, who are then torn out of their normal lives by a lockdown, which was unnecessary. And at the same time, the structures of authority are destabilized. Mix all that together, pour it in a pan, stick it in the oven, and this is what you cook up. What's the good news? Well, that was really the end of what I had to say. I don't have any good news. That's it. But I will say this. One thing you can do, get out of the cities. That's for sure. Move to the country. That's where you need to be. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.